Yeah. 2 minutes.
Thank you.
How are you?
Are we gonna be streaming this?
We got $50 seats.
Yeah, I saw it. It said 10:30.
Your handout or the one?
It says 10 now.
Everything I sent out.
At 10.
Jackie's handing out.
Agenda.
What are you handing out? What I said?
Oh, yeah, I gotta hand it
No, I
out.
left mine at home, so I didn't even have one I wrote.
You only have one?
I left it in the library.
I don't know that we need them,
I don't
but
think we do.
we're streaming, right?
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting of the Shreveport City Council Public Safety Committee meeting to order. I'd like to start out and have Chief Wolverton give us an invocation.
Pray with me, please. Father, we just come to you now with hearts that are filled in awe of you, Lord. You're our Creator. We only exist because of you, and we thank you for your grace and mercy that you show on us every day. Without you, we would be nothing. Father, I pray as we go into this meeting that you would be with each person, be with every heart, be with every mind. Father, may we request wisdom from above. Wisdom that only you can give to fulfill and do the things that we need to do and what we've been called to do and took an oath to do. Father, we want to give you praise for everything, and we praise you for what you're going to do in advance in this meeting. And Father, we pray that everything that we say and do will bring you honor and glory. We ask for forgiveness of our sins. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Madam Clerk, I have a question real quick. Since, Levette, are you on this committee?
Yes.
You are? Okay, so it's 3 of us then. Okay, sure. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, I wanted to make sure that both chiefs get to vote on this. They're members of this committee too, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, I'd like to go ahead and open up, and if anybody has any public comments, if you would, just come up and state your name and your address, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kenneth Kraft, 157 Archer Avenue, 71105. Is that okay? I can leave. You can hear me okay?
You're good.
Thank you all for calling this meeting. I have a handout from Ms. Jackie, something I proposed since the middle of Mayor Glover's first term for public safety in the operating budget reserve. You all may have heard that. The penny on the 5 to bring in about 9 million, somewhat more, somewhat less, somewhat nothing. We respect that. However, it's time. The 9.05 is the total. Had been 9.6. The state legislature removed 0.55, which went away June 30th of 19. Although Ken went around the city busting chops, pennies, Kohl's, Home Depot still charging the full 9.6 in late July. Terrible, terrible. And probably pocketing the difference. We don't need to do this forever, 3 or 4 years. Then the reserve is fully funded. And if we renew anything or ask the voters again, we drop it to half of that. A penny on an Alex. and that brings in 4.5 million. You gotta fund the raises forever. We're not giving a one-time lump, although I've advocated that as recently as March, right before the shutdown. I'll expand on this in a column in John's paper, and I'll give a little more detail. But I say let's up-fund. Y'all listening in Seattle and Portland, we're gonna up-fund our public safety. I know Grayson's extremely experienced in fire service, been a chief. We got good people on this council who are going to up-fund our public safety and let the voters decide. And since it is public safety, Chief, climb that Wolverton mountain. Let's do tap lights. Let's not lose any more citizens
Chair, that's 2 minutes.
who light candles. Let's let them do this for life instead of lighting candles.
Thank you, Mr. Kraft. Any other public comments?
Good morning, members of the committee, Chair Butcher, Barbara Sellers, 222 Lafitte Road. Just want to thank the committee for coming together after last week's council meeting and being prepared to pull up their sleeves to do the hard work that must be done. That's representative of what Mr. Kraft just said, all of public safety. In the recent week, I've had a lot of members ask why. Why would that even be a consideration to divide fire from police? And quite frankly, I don't have an answer. I don't have a reasonable answer. But I do know this. Fire and police have always worked together. They've always been treated the same as it relates to pay. When fire is down at the legislature, we take the lead. As recently, most notably in 2018, we crafted a bill for post-traumatic stress disorder, which encompassed and embodied law enforcement. We brought that bill forward because we know how important it is to be representative of all of public safety. We've taken that lead on state supplemental pay. We've taken that lead here locally as far as the 2% at the state level. Fire took that lead, and we brought it back home, and thank God the police were recipients of that. So as we do the hard work today, and we hear from the department heads, we're very grateful for the open minds that will come forward to find some resolution that's representative of both fire and police so that we have stability in both departments and the pay is representative of the value that resonates from the city administration to our members. Thank you so much.
Ms. Sellers, if you have a second,
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to clarify something. This is never about dividing. This was a starting point. It's a starting point from a plan that was presented by SPOA. Do you have a similar plan to present?
Ms. Fuller, I know that the fire chief has presented several plans, and I know he responded with a 2-page comprehensive letter answering what fire has given up over the last many years through continuing budgets. And so
your association does not have a plan that is parallel to the plan presented by the SPOA?
our executive board meets with the fire chief monthly, and our
Okay.
executive board is very aware of the
Then I'll
fire.
reiterate, this is a starting point based on losing positions that you all have already stated that y'all aren't willing to put up. This is not about creating a wedge. This is about starting. This is about beginning a process to see what we're actually gonna be able to do if we're able to do it. I just wanna make sure that's clear.
Councilman Fuller, if the fire chief gave up any more positions in current staffing crisis, let me say that again, staffing crisis, it would be very disingenuous for him to come forward with a plan and then have the overtime need to be able to put bodies in the seat, to be able to deploy the services our citizens
So
expect.
I'll reiterate,
But Councilwoman Fuller.
this is a starting point.
Councilwoman Fuller, this public comment, so she, just let her finish her comments and then we can come back.
She finished her comment
Well,
before I started.
Okay, as a member of this committee, I'm just saying, you're not a member, so as a
Yes, I
member
am,
of this.
actually.
No, you're not.
I'm not?
No, ma'am.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
Thank you.
thank you, ma'am.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sellers. Any other public comments? Okay, moving on. I'd like to go ahead and approve the minutes from the April the 9th, 2020 meeting.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Motion by Councilman Nicholson, second by Councilman Bowman. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay. I'm going to turn this over to Councilwoman Taylor about to discuss the Internal Reform Committee.
Task force.
Task Force. It says committee, but task force.
I was like, what is that, Councilman Goodrum? Actually, we're going in and working out some logistics, and I emailed Danielle because I plan to do 4 virtual meetings regarding this reform. And I wanted to get some clarity since some of my participants will be handling this via Zoom and participating with this. I'm gonna structure it pretty much like a town hall where I would have those 4 meetings where they would be in the evening time, probably about an hour and a half. And so I'm still waiting to get some full confirmations from that, but I also need to know when the legislature is going to reconvene, and I will know more on that tomorrow, when their next session starts, because I wanna make sure that as we do the committee meetings, that we have all of our information that we will be able to present to the legislature during their October session. So I don't know if that session is going to be early October or late October, but I should know more about that tomorrow.
So we're right now in the process of just doing some homework, getting everything ready to go.
Yes, and in the technology era, to making sure that everything is everything. Because I have speakers that participate in the various meetings that will be out of town. And so I want to make sure that everyone can participate when they need to, and working with Keith Hansen logistically to make sure that everything is set so the public can definitely participate in those 4 meetings. And they probably will be held weekly, just to make sure that we get all of the information gathered and summarized so we can present to the legislature.
So for the public, kind of explain what the task force will be doing.
It's basically for Resolution 79. And what we looked at is police reform. We have different entities that some of our public may not understand when we're talking about true reform in Shreveport Police Department. And what I'm going to get from that is that I'm going to have subject matter experts along with SPD to go in and talk about how we actually want to see reform in SPD. I want to gather all of that information. We want to look at civil service laws. We also want to explore the Citizens Review Committee. And so I want to have subject matter experts along with the public to speak with that. So it's a concerted effort on all of our parts. It is not here to tear down. It's actually a point to come over here and build up. Early on, I met with Chief Warburton as well as Chief Raymond to go and explain the civil service process to me, because I wanted to be able to understand that. But I also want to know if there are some things differently that they want to see. I also want for our citizens to know that they have an intricate part in this process because of so many things that have taken place nationally as well as locally. So it's, again, a concerted effort on all of our parts. I don't want to go over here and name the names so where you would go over here and pull from them, but there's some familiar names that you would recognize that have been a part of Shreveport Police Department as well on the local scale and on the national scale that would be for true reform as to what we see. So.
Thank you. Thank you for that update. We're going to move on to discuss fire and police plans for retaining officers and firefighters and increasing pay. I just want to say before we get started with this, I don't think that there's anybody sitting up here that does not understand that we've got a problem in the city of Shreveport. I think that I've said this since I started running for office, that public safety is the cornerstone of quality of life, and we have to make that investment in our community if we expect for Shreveport to continue to grow and grow even more robustly. One of the concerns we have is a large number of both police officers and firefighters leaving. And I think that the biggest thing that concerns me most is some of them are leaving for Texas, but some of them are leaving for fire districts and other local departments closer that have better pay than we do. And that's concerning because there's not a huge investment in moving to Texas. These people can stay here and continue to live their life as they do with their children in school and go to another department and make, in some cases, $7,000 to $8,000 above what we're paying our firefighters and police officers. So I think we're at a critical point. I do commend Councilwoman Fuller for at least getting the conversation started. That's why we have 2-week layovers on these ordinances, to where we can have these conversations. And I'm grateful that all of you have showed up today, and just know that you have my support. And I typically don't try to speak for my colleagues, but I can tell you the consensus of talking to them, you have their support as well. And from talking to Chief Whitehorn, I believe you have the administration's support as well. So I think we're gonna get this together. It's not gonna be a marathon. It's gonna probably be it's gonna be a marathon, not a sprint. So let's all work together and get this done. So next year, y'all will have a little bit better or a livable wage where you can support your families. And that's what our goal is here today. So I don't know which one wants to start. Chief Raymond, do you want to start? And then do you have a presentation at all?
Chief Wilson has a PowerPoint.
Oh.
I think you better go through that.
Okay. Okay, Chief.
Good morning. First of all, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here today and have the opportunity to speak directly to you. You are our elected decision makers, and I do appreciate you affording me the time to be here today and speak to you. And I also want to thank Councilwoman Fuller for beginning the conversation. I do appreciate that. This has definitely generated that conversation that needs to occur, and I do thank you for that. I want to say that before I begin. I have a short PowerPoint. It's about 12 slides. It won't take long to go over, but there is a lot of information to digest in it, because it's just not one of those things that you can take about 5 or 10 minutes and come to a decision. But I think today it will plant a seed and be able to provide you with some ideas and options for our community, and for your decision to be able to provide a sustainable funding source for what we're trying to do here and the challenges that face us. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to be a sustainable funding source to do these kinds of things. So I want to plant a few ideas in your head and give you a little background on the department, explain to you why we are having an exodus of personnel, so that you understand what that is and how this can address it. So just to give you a brief overview, the solution that we're looking for is to establish a competitive pay plan for fire and police. We also want to increase paramedic pay. Our paramedics now is a 2-year college level program. It takes a great investment on their part to complete that course. It's almost at a nurse level where they do clinical rotations, ride-outs. They're held to a very high standard by the National Register of M&T through a accreditation process. So they have to meet so many requirements to complete that accreditation certification. And it takes a great investment on their part. And I'll show you some things in a minute on why the paramedics have a tremendous workload as it relates to EMS responses. And I'll show you a 10-year trend here in a minute. And also to establish an equipment replacement plan. That is absolutely in a crisis mode right now, our apparatus situation. And I'll share with you here some numbers and kind of explain to you where we're at in our apparatus response fleet and some of the impact that has occurred this year, some examples of that. So some funding options we're going to talk about is dedicated revenue generated by the Shreveport Fire Department, an increase in sales tax, public safety fee, ordinance fee for service, a sin tax, and the last one there is reorganization of the department. I have to say, as a fire chief, I'm not in favor of that. I'm not in favor of diminishing and decreasing service to our citizens. They have an expectation of the service that we provide. And to me, that's not a viable option, and it's counterintuitive to what we're trying to do here. And then also, it could be a combination of 2 or 3 of these things to get to the goal that we're trying to get to. And here are those goals. Increase base pay department-wide to the competitive within the region. Councilman Butcher just spoke about our region and how there are fire districts and our sister city across the river. Firefighters pay $5,200 more a year than a firefighter on the Shreveport Fire Department. However, we're making 44,000 calls a year and they're making about 12,000. They're making about 1/4 what we make. The workload is tremendous, but the disparity in pay is very wide. There's a very wide gap there. Retention of highly trained firefighters. We want to retain our firefighters. We invest a lot in them. Just yesterday, firefighter paramedic resigned. He's going to a department in Texas. He had just completed his paramedic program at Bipsy, and he walked out the door. Now, we have our paramedics sign a contract, a contractual agreement, because our taxpayers pay for that tuition, that training. And they sign a contractual agreement. They have to remain employed with the Shreveport Fire Department for 5 years to ensure that the taxpayers get a return on that investment of that 2-year training. This person chose to walk out the door right when he graduated from Bipsy and became a certified paramedic. And he basically said, I can make that up in a couple of months. I can pay that $9,500 back in a couple of months with the difference in pay I'm going to get going to Texas. That's the challenge we're facing. Recruitment of more diverse firefighters. Just recently, Act 38 was passed. There's going to be a state firefighter list, so really I think that's going to be a good thing. We'll have a larger pool of firefighter candidates to choose from, and this will help attract those from across the state. And again, if we can attract people from across the state and other regions of the states to come to Shreveport, we just increased our population. That's one of the things that we want to do. We want to grow our city. So this will be a good opportunity to do that too. I also think we should enact lateral transfer legislation at the state level. That would allow a firefighter that meets the qualifications of the Shreveport Fire Department can come directly to our department and come to work. They're a firefighter 1, they're a firefighter 2, they're a basic EMT or advanced EMT or paramedic, and they're in the retirement system already, and they could laterally transfer right to our department. Increase morale of the entire department, also replace our aged and unsafe equipment. So here's the challenge, the sustainable funding sources. That's the challenge right here. That's going to be the hard decision that will need to be made. Looking at our attrition rate right now in 2019, we lost 33. That's about 2.75 per month. So far in 2020, through August, to today in August, we've lost 25. That's an attrition rate of 3.2 per month in just January through 8 months of 2020. So that attrition rate is rising. We have scheduled to leave 6 more by the end of the year, and I'm sure we'll also receive some more resignations by the end of the year. But what's the reasons for leaving? I want to share that with you. I think you need to know. Number one, many have left because of more money, just like the example I gave you going to Texas, and they pay very well in a lot of those communities over there. But it's not the only reason. Just this week, I had a firefighter come visit me last Friday. He gave me his resignation letter. He's resigning on August the 21st. He's going back to work in Bienville Parish Fire District number 4. He lives in Bienville Parish. He travels here every day. He's done it for the last 6 years. 6 years invested on the Shreveport Fire Department. He was coming to work a couple of weeks ago, coming down West 70th Street, going to fire station number 9, where he works at, stopped at a red light. He was the first car. There was a truck behind him. There was 2 other cars behind them. The 2 cars behind the truck began having a shootout, shooting at one another. The truck behind him pulled out, took off, left him right in the line of fire. It scared him. It scared him real bad. He went home that day. His wife said, I don't want you to work there anymore. 2 days later, Bienville Parish Fire District number 4 called him and said, hey, we're hiring. You live down here, you're 5 minutes from the station, would you consider coming back to work for us? And he did. He took a reduction in pay to go to Bienville Fire District number 4. I asked him if I could share that story with you today, and he told me I could. I thought you need to know it's not just pay. There's a lot of other things factored into the reason firefighters leave this department. We had a firefighter surrender to the ministry. They went to plant a church up in Brooklyn, New York. There's other reasons why firefighters leave, but pay is one of those things. Pay is involved in that also. But I thought it was righteous to know that you should know today there are different reasons why firefighters are leaving. Workload. I mentioned the EMS workload. You know, when you can go across the river and work in Bossier City and make 12,000 calls a year versus 44,000 and get a $5,000 a year increase, that's pretty attractive. And I'm not, you know, if you've ever rode on a medic unit, I would encourage y'all, any of y'all to come ride out on some of our apparatus, and you ride on Medic 4 or Medic 5 and make about 20, 21, 22 calls a shift in a 24-hour period. Well, trust me, there's no downtime when you're making that many calls in a 24-hour period. It's continuous, back and forth, making calls, transporting patients to the hospital, getting back in service and getting a run even before you get back to the fire station. It's a tremendous load. And some of them are looking to get out from under that load. Age of our fleet, that's a challenge. I'll talk a little bit more about that and increased maintenance costs. So you all should have a copy of this. I know this is kind of hard to read. The numbers are small up here. But in the gray column, that's where we're at presently. Does everybody, y'all have a copy of this? Okay. In the gray column, that's where we're at presently. Where we want to be at is the green column. That is 17% increase. That brings us current with our sister city across the river. Brings us current with their pay scale. Now, I want you to know that's a big piece to bite off right now. I understand that. So what I'm proposing is a starting point and move towards that direction. Put a plan in place to move towards that direction based off identifying these funding sources. So in the middle column, you'll see a 4% increase, and I made this proposal a couple years ago. I know some of you have seen it. It's a 4% increase and a $100 increase a month for paramedic pay. And it would get us started in the right direction, especially for that firefighter that now a firefighter starts out at recruit pay, and that's 6 months when they attain their firefighter 1 and 2, their hazmat awareness and operations, and their basic EMT or advanced EMT, they make that jump to the firefighter pay, which is highlighted there. And as you see, if you look at that middle column, right now we're trying to, we've set a goal for every firefighter recruit to be trained to the advanced EMT level, because we're always continuing to try to provide the highest level of emergency medical service training to our citizens and in responding. And plus that helps supplement a higher level of skills on our medic unit. So when you look at that new base pay at AEMT, that third column over in the middle, in the brown part, you know, you're talking about a pretty good pay increase from what we're from the starting from the firefighter that has all the certifications and starting their working test period. You know, they make a pretty good jump right there. And I think that's something that would send a great message to our firefighters that we care about them and we want them to, we're trying to work towards that direction to become more competitive. You can see at the bottom, this is the initial cost, and this will probably be a little bit better slide to see that on. The 4% pay is about $837,000 in the base increase, $222,000 in EMT paramedic, 2% longevity increase to be about $21,000, and a blended rate of FRS at 34.5 at $372,400 for a total cost of $1.45 million. Now, to get to where Bossier's at right now is on the right side. That's a 17% increase. And like I said, I know that's a lot right there to try to do all at one time, and it's probably not something that we can do, but we can start working in that direction. And you can see the increase is significant. It's about $5.1 million when you total it all up, just to get competitive with our sister city. I want to share with you some trends, a 10-year trend here from 2010 to 2020, where we're at right now. Basically in 2010, we made about a little under 37,000 calls, 36,800. Today we're making about 44,000. We're probably going to be right around there in 2020. Actually thought we would be more around 45,000, but during the COVID lockdown, actually our our calls actually decreased during the COVID lockdown. People were staying home, they weren't going out, they weren't driving. Our motor vehicle collisions went down, so the responses actually went down. So that's why we're going to kind of be right at the same amount we were last year in 2019 to 2020. In 2010, we had 589 authorized firefighters. We now have 598. The population then was 200,000, almost 201,000. Now it's a 183, 819, according to the census estimate that we just looked at. Our budget was 48,000 in 2010. In 2020, it's 56,810, 600. Now, that 56,810, 600 is a little deceiving. I know it looks like a big jump from 48,000, but in that 56,810 is $5 million in a transfer to government funds that cannot be used for any operational or personnel services. That is what is paid. That's why we do our upper payment limit, our intergovernmental transfer for our Medicaid reimbursement. So that money's in that transfer account. It goes out as an IGT payment 4 times a year. That money comes back to the city along with the net reimbursement from Medicaid about a month later and goes into the revenue side of the budget for EMS revenue. So when you look at that 56,810, it's really 51,810, 600, because that $5 million is nothing that we use towards operational services, except for a change going into 2021. In 2021 budget, and I don't know if y'all have seen a copy of that yet. You will be getting a copy of it. We just submitted it. We took about 400,000 out of that $5 million, reduced it to 4,600,000, and we're utilizing that to pay for our EMS billing. Finance was actually paying for that, so we changed that up going into the 2021 budget year. So that will be put into contractual service in EMS, and that will pay our EMS billing service. And look at the revenue generated. EMS generated about 5.3 million in 2010. 10 years later, we're creating 16 million. I think we're going to be more closer to 17 million. Okay, now for accounting purposes, I want you to understand our net revenue is probably more around 13 to 14 million. Because as I told you, that those IGT payments come out of the expenditure side, go to the Ambulance Alliance, then it comes back in on the revenue side. And for accounting purposes, that same amount goes right back on the revenue side, you know, to make sure the numbers stay balanced. So, but it's a little deceiving in the net revenue. So our net revenue is actually probably around more closer to the 13 to 14 $14 million range, okay, as far as EMS revenue. We also receive a fire insurance rebate. This year it was $738,402. We get that every year from the state as a 2% reimbursement from insurance rates. Now, if you look at the lower left column, you'll see a comparison of base firefighter pay here locally and abroad. You can see Bossier City right underneath. We're about $5,200 difference in firefighter pay. Benton Fire Department, just north of here, actually pays more than our starting firefighters. And we've had firefighters leave and go to Benton. Plano, Texas, they're about 76,000. You know, Plano's one of those places that has a lot of big corporations there. A lot of their headquarters are there, so the tax basis and the ad valorem tax that they have in place is incredible. I know for a fact they have just a standalone ad valorem tax for apparatus replacement where they purchase 3 engines every year. Every single year they're purchasing 3 engines, they're rotating them out. Then you got Farmers Branch taking, these are actually some of the places where our firefighters have left to: Baytown, Fort Worth, and Dallas. We had firefighters working in Frisco, Texas now, former firefighters. I always consider them brothers and sisters of the Shreveport Fire Department, even though they leave. Their decision to leave is their own, you know. But we have them in Frisco and also a lot of other small towns around that Dallas Metroplex area. And then over to your right is an explanation of where we're at on our apparatus situation. As you can see at the top, our fire engines, which we have 21 that are frontline, and you can see well over half of them are 21 plus years or older. NFPA guidelines say at 15 years a engine should be moved to reserve status, and at 25 years it should be retired. We have several apparatus that are 25 plus years old. Matter of fact, 3 of those of our reserves are over 30 years old, about 33 years old. They will be retired this year. We cannot maintain parts for them. They don't make the brake parts anymore for them. Brakes are a huge safety issue on fire trucks, and you cannot find brake parts for them anymore. So once the brakes run out on those 3 white engines, you've seen the white colored engines, open cabs, they will be put to auction and will not be in our fleet anymore, which means our reserve status will go down from 7 to 4 reserve engines, which means it's going to be even harder to have a reserve engine for the frontline apparatus that are so old to make sure we have an engine in place. Our ladder trucks, you can see, average age is 15 years. 3 of those, almost half is in the 15 to 25-year range. Just recently this year, at one point in time, we had only 4 of our 7 ladder trucks in service. We had 3 ladder trucks out of service because they were waiting on parts. We have one that we waited a month for a part to actually be made because the truck is so old. They actually had to make the part's not sitting on a shelf somewhere. It has to be made because the truck is so old. That increases the price of that part. You know, a brand new truck, you can go out and buy a water pump for about $7,500. Try to go find a water pump for a 20-year-old engine, you're probably going to pay upwards of $700–800 for that water pump. And then our medic units, those are our highest run volume units. We were fortunate enough in 2017 to do 6 remounts, and those 6 remounts are already pushing 100,000 miles or more, just in the time frame that we've had them. And we do what we call remounts. We try to save the city money. Instead of buying a brand new ambulance that would be anywhere from, you know, $250,000 to $300,000, we can remount a medic unit. We take the box off the old chassis. They refurbish it, redo it, completely refurbish it, and place it on a new chassis. We can do that for around $190,000 to $200,000. So we try to be good stewards of the taxpayer money, and that's how we've invested back in those medic units because, like I said, they're rolling. They're rolling a lot, and if you drive around town, you see them a lot, going up and down the road and running with their lights and sirens on. These are our calls for service over the last 35 years, and you can see the trend that we're at. If you look at the purple line, that's fires. Our fires are actually stayed pretty flat. They remain around 1,200 to 1,300 a year. When you look at our EMS transports, that would be, we get an EMS call, the medic unit goes there and actually transports a patient to the hospital. Those have continued to increase over the last 35 years. Then you have your EMS calls. That's the third line, more the bluish line. You can see it has steadily increased, and then our total run volume is the top line, which shows the increase over the last 35 years. And that continues to grow. So here's some proposed revenue sources I wanted to talk with you a little bit in detail about. The first one is going to be our dedicated revenue, which I spoke about. We should be roughly around between 16 and 17 million a year. Again, that net revenue is more around 13 to 14, as I explained a while ago. And then our fire insurance payment, we've already received that this year. It was $738,402. You know, if we could just dedicate by ordinance a portion of that revenue back to the department where it could be invested into equipment replacement plan, or even the 1.5 for the raises, you know, you're talking about a $3 million dedication of that 13 to 14 million that comes in. And that would be dedicated back to the department. A lot of cities do that. They dedicate the revenue back to the department that generates it, so it can continue to do those things, continue to replace equipment and continue to provide that service. So that's one option right there. That's readily available right now. It would just take by ordinance dedicating a portion of that back, and there are several cities that I'm aware of that already do that. Sales tax increase. I'll have to say, I've had several conversations about this over the last couple of days. I tend to be in agreement with Mr. Ken Kraft. I know he's been before y'all many times and discussed this. You know, a sales tax increase just of 1/4 of 1 cent would produce $11.3 million. $11.3 million. Now that's enough to provide an overall pay increase for all city employees and equipment. And the thing about a sales tax is, even though our population has decreased in the city of Shreveport, you know, today, right now, people have come to work in Shreveport. They're here working. Today, they're going to go to lunch and spend money, which is sales tax. They're going to stop at the Home Depot, the Lowe's, the Walmart or whatever on the way home here in Shreveport. They're going to spend their money, and that's sales tax every time they buy something in the city of Shreveport. Yes, they may hit North Market and go to Blanchard, or hit I-220 and go to Benton, or hit I-20 and go to Bossier or to Greenwood. But for 8 to 12 hours of the day, they increase the population of the city of Shreveport, and they're spending money here. So this would not be a total burden just on the citizens that lives here. It would be something that anybody who comes through Shreveport, and look at the major arteries that we have, I-20, I-49, people traveling back and forth going north and south, east and west, and they stop off here, get gas, buy something at the store. Maybe they see the aquarium down there. Hey, I'm gonna go visit the aquarium. Drove by there the other day. I was very encouraged. I saw about a group of 25 people going into the aquarium downtown, you know, having a vibrant Riverview area and a place to do those kinds of things. And hopefully, once we recover from this COVID, those things are going to pick back up. But you know, this I think is a very viable solution to what we're trying to look for. Blanchard, I'll give you an example. Blanchard passed a 1 cent sales tax. I think it was probably about 3 to 4 years ago. And since then, they've been able to do incredible things up there. And they actually pay their firefighters more than our starting firefighters now up there at Fire District 1. The other option would be a public safety fee. Now, many municipalities use the public safety fee. It's one of the reasons why Bossier is in the situation, in the position they're in now. They have a public safety fee on their water bill. It's $10 for residents. It's $20 for commercial water meters. Now, I know that's a sensitive subject. I know. Now, right below that, I've got recycle fee. I don't know where the recycle fee stands right now. You know, I know that I've heard on media reports that the contract ends in October, and whether we'll have recycle pickup or not, we don't know yet. That's from what I know. It's $250 that's already on the bill that's being paid. If we added $750 to it, add $5 to it and increase it to $750 a month, you just on residential meters, you just created $5.58 million in revenue on 70,000 meters in the city. I confirmed that number with our former director, Barbara Featherston. I told you, I actually talked to her yesterday. She was still working yesterday, y'all. Crazy. And then the commercial meters would double to 15, and that would produce a 1.4. So you're looking at a total revenue generation of about $7 million for a public safety fee. If we increase that to what Bossier charges, 10 and 20, then you've just increased that to 9.4 million. And again, this may be an opportunity to provide enough for all city employees to benefit from this. And not only in raises, but also equipment. Because I remember, I think y'all called Gary Norman up, and he said they were needing packers. You know, if we continue to do garbage pickup, you got to have those tools to do it with and resources to do it with. So there's, you know, I know there's other equipment that needs to be purchased by the city too, and some of these sustainable sources could provide for all of that. If we did this, no citizen would ever receive an EMS bill because they're already paying a fee for that service. So, you know, now we actually bill by ordinance EMS transports, treatment no transport, things like that. If we went to the public safety fee, there would be no billing of any citizen of Shreveport for EMS services because they're already paying for it. They wouldn't have to pay for report fees that we have in ordinances. I wouldn't see any reason why they would need to. They're already paying the public safety fee. They're already covering that in their fee. So that is a plus for that, for the public safety fee. They never receive a bill. A fee-for-service ordinance. This is something that is across the East Texas area is being implemented now. I'll give you an example here in Louisiana. St. Tammany Fire District 1 already has this ordinance in place since 2015. And it's a fee for service. The fee is charged based off tiered 1, 2, and 3 levels of responses. And it's billed to the insurance company. Now, I'm still learning this particular revenue source here. I do have our EMS billing director here today, Scott Shirley, and if you have any answers after the presentation, he'll be able to answer those questions because they presently bill for St. Tammany Parish for this ordinance. So he's very familiar with it. He's familiar with the state laws that affect it. There is a state resolution that affects it that was passed, I think, in 2009, 2010 timeframe, Resolution 147. So he would be able to answer a little bit more, but it would provide a revenue stream. And for me, this type of fee-for-service ordinance, I think, should be for equipment replacement. It should be for making sure we always have the resources because it charges things like if we have to pull the jaws of life and actually extricate somebody, or if we have to use hazmat resources, absorbent socks, you know, things like that to stop a leak, contain a leak, that kind of thing, and mitigate it. It allows you the opportunity to charge that back to their insurance company. So though, for me on this one, I don't think this was a good one for a raise, but I do think it is a potential option to have some replacement funding for equipment because that's what it's designed for. You're utilizing that equipment, which is not cheap, I promise you. But it's needed to provide the service that we do. A sin tax, which I didn't have a whole lot of figures. I'll be honest with you, I didn't know where to go to even find the figures on this type of tax. And actually, this was brought to me as a recommendation from one of the council members. And we discussed it a little bit in detail. I told him I would list it as an option. I'm not sure what the figures are on the annual sales of things like alcohol and smokeless tobacco and cigarettes and things like that. But it is an option out there that could produce some revenue if it was something that you wanted to consider. And I'm sure that would probably need a little bit more research because I wasn't able to find the research today. But I did want to list it because one of the council members did bring it to my attention, and I wanted to make sure that I included it. So in closing, we have an obstacle. We have a giant that we're facing. Ryan Holiday said, whatever we face, we have a choice. Will we be blocked by the obstacles, or will we advance through or over them? You know, David faced Goliath. Everybody's familiar with David and Goliath, right? We live in the South. Everybody should know about David and Goliath and the Bible Belt here, right? We have a Goliath facing us now. He's out there on the other side, and he's walking down that valley, and he's taunting us every day, saying, you need to do something, you need to do something. You gotta fix it. David's decision to face Goliath was grounded in his faith, and the fight was for the right reason. You know, we're talking about the right reason here, service to our citizens. David had a dangerous opportunity in front of him, and he made the tough decision to face the giant. It wasn't an easy decision, but he did. He made the decision, and he faced it head on. And he faced it, and he did it well. It's time to act. SFD desires to continue to serve at a high level and exceed the expectations that that our citizens deserve. But every day, that's getting more and more difficult with our fleet the way it is and the challenges that we're facing in retaining employees, retaining good trained firefighters, and also attracting them to come to work here. We've all admitted and agreed action needs to be taken. I've heard every one of us say that. We've all said it together in unity that we need to do something. It's now time for us to act and work together to better for the city of Shreveport and also our public safety employees. So that's the presentation. I'll be glad to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Chief. Any member of the committee have any questions for the?
Yes. Chief Overton.
Yes,
Chief,
ma'am.
Thank you for the presentation. You've actually shared a lot. And as I can appreciate, as I said to some of my colleagues while you were speaking, that I appreciate that you actually went even beyond the step of just not looking at fire, but ways that we could look at for all of our employees. And that is very, very important to me as well. There are some things that I definitely want to talk to the administration about, as well as my colleagues, when we talking about the looking at the fee, the monthly fee.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm familiar with that with Bossier, and I pretty much learned about that when my mom had to be transported in Bossier City, and looking at their structure when this were discussions some time ago on the council. So I just want to thank you for this, because you've actually laid out a blueprint that's worth looking at and talking about and
Yes, ma'am.
discussing further. So I appreciate that.
Thank
I just want to, again, just piggyback on Councilwoman Taylor. I appreciate the inclusion of all the city employees. I think that's where I was on last week as well. I did ask, and I think it was last week, for administration to look at the two, if we did decide not to go further with recycle. Of course, we don't know where it is right now. But what would that 250 be? How much? What is that total, and could that be used towards the fee?
The 250 could be used. $2.50 will only generate $1,980,000 dollars at this point.
Okay.
What Chief Wolverton included was an additional amount, another $7.50 on top of that.
Was it an extra 750 or was it 550?
There was the first proposal was adding 5.
Adding
That
five.
produces
Okay,
about 5.3. And on the commercial meters, it would be double that.
I got you.
On the commercial meters, it would be double.
Okay. Okay.
But only the 750 on residential meters.
Okay.
You know, and then the second one was matching what Bossier is doing. Bossier is $10 on residents and $20 on commercial.
Gotcha.
I think we have about 8,000 to 9,000 commercial meters that I counted up according to the stats that Barbara sent me.
Mhm.
So that's kind of what we're looking at, is probably $8,000 to $10,000 range. She says some of them have multiple meters, things like that. A lot of the commercials do. They're all under the same business, but they have multiple meters.
Okay.
So
And I did, it was one, on Ken Crep, Ken has brought that to us, I think, several times in the past couple of years. I was so concerned and listened about how it'd be detrimental for me to support any kind of tax or sales tax at that time, but that's definitely an option that I'd be happy to look at this particular, right now at this time.
Yeah, and on the
What we're
sales
facing.
tax, you know, I would recommend the April ballot. That way it gives us time to get the message to our citizens, explain what we're trying to do, you know, and also give them the opportunity to speak about it also. You know, but I do know it'll be one of those things that I believe we could all get behind. We could also, I think we have the ability to convince our citizens that it would be a great investment, and it wouldn't be something that they would just be taking on. It would be also all those, as I mentioned, just an example of those who come to work here every day.
Okay. That's all I had.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, Councilman.
Chief, I appreciate your presentation very much, and I'm pleased that, to my perception, the entire council agrees that we need to act on public safety compensation now. This has been a topic of conversation since before the present council was elected, and we just come to the point where we need to move forward. You talked about a variety of funding options. Property taxes were not among them. Is that also an option for funding?
Well, in reviewing the ad valorem taxes, I think y'all have an ordinance coming before you pretty soon, ordinance 106, 107, 108. You know, this is a reassessment year. Those have been reassessed. I think y'all will be voting. I think it's my understanding that those could only be rolled forward to keep collecting the same amount that we're already collecting. And that's what the reassessment allows for. That's the way I read it and understood it. So I didn't know if that was, as far as rolling forward the ad valorem, we wouldn't be able to create any new revenue. Now, I guess maybe what you're talking about is putting it on the ballot for a dedicated property tax.
Yes, sir.
And yes, sir, that would potentially be an option too, but I didn't really research that a whole lot.
But you're not conceptually opposed to using property taxes as a revenue source for this?
No, sir, I'm not opposed.
Well, I'll just say for members of the public that it's apparent to me that we cannot reduce other areas of the general fund operating budget to a sufficient degree that we could provide our firefighters and our police officers the pay raises that they need and deserve. And so we all need to understand and acknowledge that solving this problem is going to involve additional revenue. Chief Wolverton has discussed a variety of potential sources of that additional revenue. I'd like to see us consider property tax as another possibility. And I will say along those lines that I hope that we can identify a revenue source that is no more regressive than absolutely necessary. You know, we've seen from Burns & McDonnell, our consent decree management firm, a presentation earlier this year that talked about what a tremendous burden water bills are for many of our poorest citizens. And if we put a flat fee on that water bill, we're solving this problem by charging the multimillionaire in Southern Trace the same as the person who has the least money in the city but has a water meter. So I really am very concerned about the way we distribute the revenue burden as we solve this problem. You know, sales tax, like a public safety fee, is also regressive. And for that reason, I hope that we can consider, if we all agree that additional revenue is necessary, the possibility of dedicated property taxes to fund public safety. That's something that many other communities do, and something that I think will work quite well to address this problem. Thank you, Chief.
Yes, sir. I want to say I agree with you. I mentioned the ad valorem tax. That's a property tax in Plano that's dedicated directly to equipment replacement. So, yes, and I agree with. That's why when I talked about the public safety, I know that's not probably the optimum, but it's an option. I think the sales tax is something that is distributed a little bit more and doesn't have the same impact as the public safety fee. You know, and with the property tax, again, you're confining it to those who live here in Shreveport, based off the assessment of their property. So then it confines them and not anybody traveling through here. So that's why I said, from my perspective, sales tax seems to be a pretty good option to look at and research and maybe try to pursue.
Well, and I'll say I'm, in terms of my own position, I'm least comfortable with a flat fee. I'm willing to discuss a sales tax, and I hope property tax can be on the table for discussion. I was talking to a member of my family last night at supper. We had 2 children who turned 3 and 9, and so we all got together, and she said to me, I can't believe how low my city property taxes are. You know, you get a bill and there are different governmental entities that are taxing you, but the city piece of our property taxes are really very low.
Yes, sir.
And if we don't collect money that's necessary to fund city services, we can't provide the services. So I really think we need to take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I also think you make a great point, because when you look at those property taxes, I think a lot of our citizens forget they're broken down into, there's parish taxes, and
Right.
there's school board taxes, and then there's city taxes, and I think when they see it that way, from the city standpoint, it's pretty small.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Fuller,
Well, I'm on the committee, I'm gonna refrain. Thanks.
you're more than welcome to speak then.
We're good.
Chief Whitehorn, did you have something you wanted to add?
I was gonna wait till after, Chief Raymond finished his and then address the administration side of it.
Okay, thank you. Chief, real quick, I have a couple points. Property taxes, I would pretty much go with the same list that Councilman Nicholson just mentioned. However, I might put property taxes in the middle. People that live on Fairfield Avenue, in the big mansions, they pay a lot of property taxes. So I just feel like that it is a little bit more equitable as far as the whole community and people outside of Shreveport, because you're right, we have a lot of bedroom communities that shop, and I just feel like that sales tax and a quarter cent sales tax is not a whole bunch. So I like the sales tax aspect of it. The public safety fee was something originally that the mayor and I talked about whenever we did the trash fee, and we just got to a point where we couldn't get the money up enough, the fee, in order to pass it to include public safety. I like that aspect of it, but the only way that I could support that is if it went to the taxpayers or to the voters for a vote, and that includes moving that $2.50 over. I think that the citizens are paying $2.50 for recycling, and that's what we told them the $2.50 are for. So it would require, in my opinion, us to go to the voters and say, do you mind us reallocating that to whatever? So I don't even like to even talk about that $2.50. If we're not going to recycle it, use it for recycling, then we need to do something else with it, and that would have to be either cutting it or taking it back to the voters and letting them make a decision on it. So, but I am also very interested in the revenue that you generated. When I started the ambulance at Fire District 5, the revenue that we generated from that was left for operations. That's all. We didn't want to make money off of it. We didn't have to put it into our general fund. That was basically the drop dead amount, $75 is what we needed to be able to operate that ambulance. And we didn't take that and put it into revenue. We basically operated our ambulance. And there were some cases when we didn't make very many runs that we had to supplement it from our general fund. So how much of this 16 million plus the 750,000 plus or minus goes into the general fund that's not allocated to the fire department? Do we know that?
In essence, when you look at the 16 million that's being generated and you look at the budget of 58 million, well, you can attribute
It goes-
all of it is actually going
Yeah.
to the fire department.
Okay. All right. The other thing that's very interesting to me is the where we charge for services. I think that that's something that could be done very easily and fairly quickly to start generating some money. I would love to have a meeting at some point with maybe you and is it ACS that still does your?
It's Insight Billing.
Okay. It
And-
still does
and-
your billing. and discuss maybe an amount of, if we could get some dollars and cents together and give it to the council, I don't believe any of us would have a problem with doing that. I remember going back to the fire department days, we had a well blowout at the end of Norris Ferry Road. We charged them for being there over and above what the call of duty was for us, what our and I want to say it ended up being like $375,000, but it was it was like a 10, 15 day deal that we had to have men there. So I think that that's a good way to at least have some resources coming into us, and that's something that can be done by the council. And I think that we would all probably, after looking at it, and if it is something that's feasible, I think we could get that done this year to maybe help y'all out a little bit. So I think that you're right, though. I think that this is going to have to go to the voters in order to have a sustainable, long-term plan. And I think it's important for us to really come up with a game plan with a combination of all of these and just see where we're at. And I'm sure between Chief Whitehorn and the mayor and you and the council, we can come up with a plan in the next month because we are losing people. And like I said at the last meeting, it's almost like you've got a gunshot wound victim laying on the ground. You got to stop that bleeding, and then you take them to the hospital and try to get it, get it fixed where they can live for the rest of their life in surgery. So I think that we really need to do this sooner than later. So, but the presentation was good, and I appreciate you.
Yes, sir.
Talking to us.
I'll send you all a copy of the St. Tammany ordinance today. That way you'll have kind of a sample to work off of and kind of a template, and you'll see kind of what they're doing. And also, if you have any questions, if you'll forward them to me, I'll make sure I get the answers from Scott Shirley, our Insight Billing person. He'll be able to answer all those questions, and we can go ahead and get those answered in advance for you.
Well, one question that I have is, what would his projection be for revenue?
We don't have projection. We don't have projection revenues yet because we're just at the infant stage of this with the fire department. They're giving us some numbers, and we'll be able to apply what we already know in the industry to those numbers to provide you a projection.
How long do you think it'll take to get those numbers together?
Chief, that's going to depend on how quick you can give me your estimates.
Yeah, we can.
In your spare time, Chief,
Well,
if you
well,
don't
what we
mind.
have to do, we'll have to look at the data as far as motor vehicle collisions, that level of motor vehicle collision response, hazmat calls, fires, things like that. Accumulate those numbers and then apply the fee to those numbers. So we'll start working on that today.
How has just to jump from that, how has the fee that we added for non-transports, how has that affected your budget now that you've almost a year into it?
It started increasing, we started last October.
Yes, sir.
Right now, I know even with COVID going on, at the same time, this year and last year, we were above what we were collecting last year. But we also, in the 2020 budget, because that we raised revenue up to 18 million. I don't think we're going to make quite that 18 million because of the COVID 2-month lockdown. So I don't think we're going to quite make that. I think we'll be more around 17 million on projected revenue. But we have seen, from the monthly increases compared to 2019, that treatment transport is increasing it some.
I'd like to see that number because I think that was a good thing that we did last year to try to help, and it's thinking outside the box. So because I heard something the other day, they dispatched somebody to somebody that had stepped on a piece of wire and wasn't bleeding or anything. Wanted the fire department to come check it out. I mean, that's getting to the point of where we're almost like an emergency room, and that's why your call volume's going up. And so if they know they're going to be charged for that, just like they're going to be charged in the emergency room, maybe that'll kind of hinder some of those. And I think Dallas has even gone to where they're not even sending anybody out for calls like that. Is that right?
I'm not sure about Dallas, but I do know I've gotten calls about the treatment no transport fee from some of our citizens, and I explained to them the ordinance that was passed, and so I know those billings are occurring.
Okay.
Right now, I looked at logos right before I came down here. EMS billing revenue is about 8.7 million right now. And we've got 3 additional upper payment limit Medicaid reimbursements coming that should be around between $1 and $1.2 million each net profit.
Okay.
Is what we're being told. And then we have our remaining 5 months of, you know, of just EMS billing.
Okay, Chief, any other questions for him?
Chief, you may not have answers to these questions today, and if you don't, I'll just follow up with you at a later time. But you know, our population since 2010 has decreased fairly substantially, and our number of firefighters per 1,000 citizens has increased from 2.9 to 3.2. I'd be curious to know what is our target ratio? I mean, how many firefighters per 1,000 citizens should we have? And another question on that same slide, why have our calls that firefighters have been making increased so dramatically over the past 30 years as our population has declined?
Well, EMS calls, you know, the only thing I can relate to the EMS increase is probably we have a aging population in the city of Shreveport. As you get into more of the geriatric ages, you start making more and more calls. As Councilman Butcher pointed out a while ago, we do get a lot of calls for service. It may not be an emergency that you and I would say is emergency, but according to our response and our guidelines from our medical director, you know, if a person says I'm having difficulty breathing, that's an emergency response.
Mm-hmm.
You know, once we get on scene, that it may not be that. That does happen. We do calls for service now. There's many of our citizens that call and say, "Hey, I've fallen out of bed. Can you help me? I'm not hurt. I just need help getting back up in the bed." And we go. We make that call. We make sure they're medically sound, and we assist them with that medical assist. So those calls range from what I've seen in the fire service. You know, that 1985, we went to these things, and that was it. Over the last 35 years, the fire service has changed to where it's an all hazards response. You know, whatever that may be. And you know, I'll be honest with you, the Shreveport Fire Department, and also I think the fire service nationally, we've always had the attitude of don't worry about the mule, just load the wagon. If you call us and we can say yes and come help you, then we say yes and come help you. And we do that a lot. I mean, we do that incredibly a lot for a lot of our people. And we're not an organization that says no. If someone calls and says we need your assistance for help, and those things don't always come through 911. Those things come to my office and say, "Hey, we got this going on, can the fire department assist with it?" Yep, we work for our citizens, we work for you, and yep, we can assist with that. And it's just one of those things, you know, that we feel like we're called. We took an oath to provide public service. That's what we should be about. And if our citizens ask, we try to say yes. And then if we can't say yes, we try to say, well, let me see what we can do. And so from that perspective, as calls, you know, calls have increased. But those EMS calls, you can see they have dramatically increased. Those are EMS calls. You see that fire line stayed sort of flat. Now, when it comes to personnel per 1,000, I'm not more so focused in on firefighters per 1,000. I'm more focused in on what National Fire Protection Association says is the safe operation and for firefighters on emergency responses. And that's governed by 1710, NFPA 1710, which says from a safety standpoint and reduction, and studies have shown the reduction of firefighter injuries and deaths is an engine crew should have 4 people on the truck. We never have 4 people on a fire truck. Never. It's going to be a captain, an engineer, and 1 firefighter on the back. There should be always 2 firefighters on the back from a safety perspective. Our rescue trucks, by an NFPA standard, should have 6 people on it, based off what it's designed to do and the specific skill sets that they have to do what they do. The vehicle extrication, the high angle rescue, the trench rescue and things like that that are specialized. A ladder truck. A ladder truck is, should have, we have 2 people on our ladder truck, a captain and an engineer. NFPA says it should have firefighters on it also. Just from a safety standpoint and arriving on a first alarm response to a fire or emergency scene and being able to delegate the things out that need to occur on a fire scene to mitigate it, to get from point A to point D, mitigate that emergency scene. The way we have supplemented that and tried to create that is we send extra companies. Typically a first alarm response is going to be 3 engines, a ladder truck, rescue truck, battalion chief, medic unit. We send another engine, what we call cold response. They're going to that reported fire also. Everybody else is running hot. They're running lights and sirens. First unit gets on scene and they call and say, yep, we got a 1-story wood frame structure, heavily involved fire, smoke showing from the A and B side. This is what we got. Bring next company in, bring us a line. That 4th pump that's coming now they start running hot. They start running like it's a working fire, and that's so that we have 3 extra people on that engine coming to supplement and be able to do the task assignments that happen on the fire ground. So what you could have in 3 engines with 4 people on it, we have to bring an additional engine, which means that additional engine that's coming from somewhere, another fire station city, now there's a hole. There's a hole over there. So what happens is our communications, which, you know, they do an outstanding job. They're an accredited communication agency. Thousands and thousands of calls come through our 911 center. Every one of them come through Shreveport Fire Department communications first. Every call from the parish. Well, now they're looking, okay, we need to bring this pump here, bring this pump here, bring this engine here, so that we have at least a minimal amount of coverage in the remainder of the city square miles that we're trying to cover. So they start what we call backing up and moving companies around. If we have full companies, we wouldn't have to do that. You know, and sometimes that increases response times because you've had to send extra companies to make sure it's safe. Now you have an increased response time because this house is empty, but now there's an EMS call in that first in district, and there's an engine coming from a lot further away to make that call. We see it every day with our 10 medic units. We run out of 10 medic units continually. Almost every single day, we run out of medic units. 25 times in the month of July, we ran out of medic units. We have 10 medic units. Every one of them in service on a call with a patient. And we wind up calling mutual aid from Bossier City or Valentine Ambulance Service because there's not enough ambulances to cover the amount of calls that we're going to. So when I look at it, it's not from a per 1,000. That's something we put in our budget book and equate it to the population. But for me, it's more of a safety of the firefighters and having the number of personnel there to safely and efficiently mitigate an emergency scene and reduce firefighter injuries and deaths. But also, the ripple effect from that is the citizen gets a better service. They get a faster response time. They have plenty of people there to mitigate whatever task that needs to be done and make that scene better than what it was when they got there when it was an emergency.
Well, Chief, I appreciate that. I certainly want the fire department to have as many firefighters as it needs to safely and efficiently provide services to our citizens. I do think, Mr. Chairman, that the ratio of firefighters to citizens is an important data point, as we evaluate budgeting in the department as a whole from 30,000 feet. I'm not suggesting that we reduce the number of firefighters by any means, but I do think that in the long term, there has to be some relationship between the number of citizens that are being serviced and the number of firefighters, and for that matter, police officers the city employs. Thank you.
I agree with that, Councilman. One thing to keep in mind, though, and a lot of people don't understand this, and the chief really hadn't hit on this. There's something called property PIL, which is who grades the fire departments for what your insurance rate's going to be. And right now we're a Class 1 fire department, and a lot of that deals with. I mean, they look at the number of men you have at a fire, And if you don't meet that threshold of the number of trucks or, I was in a fire district, so we had to have a tanker truck with so many thousand gallons of water there. They grade you every, 2 years?
Every 5 years.
Every 5 years.
If you're
So-
Class 1, though, you can have a random at any time during that 5 years.
So they look at your equipment, and so the urgency for me is if the chief loses so many people, we lose personnel, that he has to shut down a fire station, and you go from a 4-minute response to a 6-7 minute response in some areas, property insurance could come next year, pull those reports and see, well, number one, it took you 7 minutes to get there as opposed to 4 minutes, and when you got there, you only had X amount of firefighters on the scene within the first, I think it's like the first 5 minutes. They want
It
to
is.
see how
400
quickly.
480 seconds, I think.
Yeah, they want to see how many people you have there. So my concern is, and I might as well just put it out on the table, the chief and I have had some conversations. We're getting to a staffing level where we're going to have to start browning out stations at some point. And that could be number 10, which I know is the holy grail of fire stations in the city of Shreveport. But it could be. I mean, it could be you shut down 10. And it could be you shut down 22. But I'm afraid that if that happens, it could affect our PAL, and which would relate to higher insurance costs to you on your insurance bill. So that's something else. Life and safety is always number one. But number two is we want to make sure that we have the best fire department around, because like I've said to several of your guys, when I started in 1991, 1988 as a volunteer, but in 91 as a full-time fireman, the threshold was to be there. And I made the analogy the other day about the captains and the San Francisco Giants. Probably not very many people remember that the captains were a farm club for the Giants. So I just want to make that clear but we always wanted to get to the Giants. We wanted to get to that level. And now it blows my mind that we have firefighters that are leaving to go to Bienville Parish Fire District 4 and to DeSoto Parish Fire District 9, when 10 years ago when I was the chief of District 5, or probably let's go back 15, DeSoto didn't even have any paid firefighters. We made the majority of their runs down there. So I just think, and I want to stress this to the other council members and to the other members of this committee and to the mayor, that when it comes to police and fire, we have kicked this can and kicked this can and kicked this can. We need to be making a decision in the next couple of months on which way we're going to go, because the bleeding is not going to stop. So thank you, Chief. I appreciate your presentation.
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Chief Raymond.
Good morning. I think everybody can recognize why I asked Chief Wolverton to make his presentation first. So I can echo a lot of the sentiments that he expressed regarding his firefighters, regarding retention, regarding equipment. We have very similar problems in the Shreveport Police Department. I also think it is important that we maintain the financial association that we have with the firefighter rank structure. We've historically followed their rank structure pay differentiation within the police department. For example, their captain and our sergeant have similar supervisory positions, and they have very similar pay. So that rank structure is important. I think in a lot of cases you have firemen and policemen that would be just as happy in reverse roles. So someone that has a desire to be a public safety professional wants to help people. Some people may be more drawn toward the police department, but that doesn't mean that they would not be firemen and vice versa. So I think we're recruiting in some manner from the same applicant pool. It's that personality. And so if you keep that pay structure similar, then we allow people to make the decision that's actually best for them individually, versus someone saying, well, I really want to be a police officer, but the fire department's making $1,000 more a year. I could also be a fireman and be just as happy. So there's a number of reasons to keeping that pay structure similar in my opinion. Just to speak, and I know we had some individual meetings that not all council members were present for, certainly weren't made public, regarding the pay plan that was proposed by Councilwoman Fuller. And I as well appreciate the opening of the conversation in order to have this discussion. The biggest concern from the financial perspective is we had to unfund 29 police positions in our 2021 budget. And I understand y'all have not received that yet. You'll get, I believe, in October. We had a continuation budget from last year, $60.58 million. But within that continuation budget, we had a 2% longevity increase, which cost us about $860,000 for all our personnel. That's pay plan and IMPERS increases. We also had some increases to the employee retirement system, I believe. And then within our budget, we had to increase contractual services for our report management system that we have to implement next year in order to be compliant with the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting System. We also had some increases in materials and supplies and equipments and services for the new tasers we have to get. We're upgrading routers in our car to the AT&T FirstNet so we could take advantage of the new report management system. So we had some increases we had to incur for 2021. The only way to have a continuation budget and pay for that $1.5 million in increases was to unfund currently vacant police positions. We budgeted 566 police positions in 2020. We started the year at 536 police officers, and we're recruiting for an academy class. And I've heard that point brought up, and I think that's important. When we budgeted last year, we very well could have got to 566. In fact, I thought we would have got to 566. And then recruiting kind of tanked nationwide and unfortunately locally, where now instead of running a class of 30 or 40 cadets, we're lucky to get 15 or 20 and graduate 8 or 9. That's happened within the last year and a half. That was a very quick, actually last year, that was a very quick change to our to the problems we have staffing the police department. Some of that, no doubt, I think could be contributed to pay, as well as some of the other concerns that Chief Wolverton noted. Increased calls for services, not being able to provide equipment that some other local agencies are able to provide their officers and things like that. But to get back on point, so we've already unfunded 29 police positions. That puts us at funding 551. The pay plan that was proposed, and there are actually several options to the pay plan that Mark Wastella has produced, but the current pay plan that's on the agenda calls for unfunding 49 police positions in order to come up with the amount of money needed. That brings us down to 502 funded police positions. We have 499 police officers today because we graduated 8 on Friday, but we're not healthy. We're forcing officers to work overtime on a daily basis. An average of 12 officers a day are being told you got to work 16 hours today because we want to maintain that service on patrol. Now, part of the pay plan does utilize the money that would go toward the 2% longevity increases because police are not guaranteed 2% legislatively as the fire department is. So the pay plan does call for, let's not give the 2% longevity, let's just put that money into this pay plan, which is about a 17 or 16% increase for a base police officer to bring us up to Bossier City and some other agencies. If you put that money back in to the budget, then you actually are funding about 15 more positions. That puts us budgeting around 517, 519, somewhere in there for next year. Now the argument could be made that we may not get to that number for next year. Really depends on our recruiting effort. But I think the concern is that we need to be allocated, we need 580 police officers. All our staffing studies, the police allocation models, when you look at our calls for service, the size of our city, they call for 580 police officers. We've never gotten to 580, but we have been in the mid 550s, and we were a healthy police department. We were able to fully staff all of our specialized units. We were able to fully staff patrol without having to spend $1 million a year in overtime costs. So that's where we operate at a healthy level. If we reduced and only fund 519 police, let's say, for next year, we would immediately have to either stop recruiting at some point because we ran out of money, even though we really need more officers, or we would have to, the very next budget cycle, add those 60 positions back in, which obviously would be a huge increase in personnel costs. So I'm not arguing that it couldn't be done for next year, but the argument is that we wouldn't be able to stay there for long, and there would really need to be a plan to get back to our being fully staffed. And that's where Chief Wolverton stepped in with a lot of his suggestions for revenue. And I think the conversation now is turned to how can we bring in the revenue needed to provide for pay raises for police, fire, and for all city employees.
Any questions for the chief?
Chief, you mentioned the fact that firefighters by statute are required to receive a 2% raise on an annual basis. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Police officers don't have the same right under state statute to that raise.
Correct.
But historically, the city has provided police officers that 2% bump.
Yes, sir.
Repeat for me, please, what you said about rolling the 2% into a, what did you say about the 2%?
So the pay plan calls for taking that 850,000 thereabouts that we are going to use for the 2% longevity and not giving the 2% longevity, but putting that money into the pay plan. So everybody gets a pay raise, but you're not getting this pay raise and a 2% longevity. The fire department would not have that option because statutorily they have to get a 2% longevity. So their pay plan would have to be in addition to 2%. Our pay plan could theoretically not give our officers a 2% longevity, take that money and push it into a pay plan. And again, you're actually getting a larger increase in pay. But you know, from a budgetary perspective, the reason we had to go down to 551 officers was to account in a large portion for the 850,000 we needed for the 2% longevity. You could use that 850,000 towards this $3.4 million pay plan.
But if I'm not pushing a position, I'm just asking a question. If we're trying to treat firefighters and police officers the same, and we want them to have the same percentage increase, then, you know, however we characterize it as being part of longevity or not, you know, we want, if we want everybody to get 4%,
Right.
then the numbers need to net out on that way.
If you want the parity,
Is that,
right.
I mean, is that what you think's appropriate?
I think it's appropriate. I did want to point out, though, that when we're talking about numbers, that the pay plan, it wouldn't be fair to remove $800,000 and say that, you know, that money's being spent on other things, because that money is actually pushed back into his pay plan. And I don't know if I'm confusing.
Well, I mean, I guess I just, regardless of what state statute requires, I think we've historically given police officers the 2% every year. I don't think anybody has suggested we should back off that. And so I think, just so that the public is not confused and I'm not confused, the conversation we ought to be having is, what raise beyond that 2% annual bump are we going to give police and fire?
Yes, I agree.
That's an easier conversation.
Certainly.
to
So I
have,
think
in my
the pay plan that the fire department has, I could put police rank structure into it, and it would look very similar,
Yeah, okay.
as it does now.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So, Chief, you said that longevity at 2% was how much a year, roughly?
Department-wide, it costs us about $850,000. And of course, it's a little bit more every year because, you know, our budget continually grows because of the 2%.
So, do you think, I like what Chief Wolverton did here with doing two different things, at 4% and at 17%, which 17% should be our goal. We should be at 7%, that's where we need to be to get to Bossier, right? 17%.
Right.
Is there any way that either department could cut something to get us to at least the 4%, and then let's start trying to find a way to build to get to the 17%, whether that is a sales tax, a public service fee, a property tax? Is there anything we can do this budget season to get us to where January the 1st, our firefighters and police officers realize that they're getting at least a 4% base pay? And I know you need your officers, and I well understand that Chief Wolverton needs his firefighters. But is there any way that the administration and the fire chief and the police chief, along with us, could work together to at least come up with something to say, look, guys, you know, we're working on this, and we're going to come up with a plan. We're going to put this on the ballot, but at least try to get them something, because I think if we wait until April turns into, you know, July of next year or the first of 2022, that's a long way down the road. And you know, I know 4% is not where we want to be, but at least it's a start. And I think that's something. I mean, Chief Wolverton has it'll cost $1.452 million to do that. I would assume your number is probably going to be pretty close to that.
It would be.
So if we could figure out a way to come up with $3 million additional dollars, which I know that sounds easier said than done, but if there's some way that we could come up with $3 million to at least tell our firefighters and police officers that, look, we're trying. We're not just gonna keep kicking that can. Maybe that would help with some of these people leaving. And I understand, I mean, I worked at Shreveport for 6-7 years, and I left and went back to a fire district. I started a fire district, left and went back to a fire district. We're not always leaving for the money. You're leaving for other things, maybe because your heart's somewhere else, or, you know, I understand that. But this does send, you know, if there are some on the cusp of maybe going to a fire district, or maybe going to a sheriff's office, or maybe going to, my wife left SPD and went to Centenary, maybe going to Centenary. If they're on the cusp and that little bit of money helps them maybe make that decision to stay for a little bit longer, I think that that's something that we really, as a group, need to be shooting towards by the end of this year. So I task us when we leave this. I think we've got a lot of stuff presented in Chief Costella's. I mean, he knows the numbers. In fact, he confuses me sometimes with the numbers that he throws out there. But I appreciate him bringing this forward to us, and at least, you know, with Councilwoman Fuller bringing this to the forefront of us to be able to look at this. But now I think it's time for us to roll up our sleeves and say, this is where we're going. This is the benchmark we're going to meet by the end of this year. This is the benchmark we're going to meet by the end of next year. And if the taxpayers say, we don't want a 1/4 cent sales tax, we don't want a public safety fee, we don't, whatever we decide to do, they don't want it, then at least we know where we stand. So anyway, that's just my thought. I would like to see us try to compare to what Chief Wolverton's done and maybe what Chief Costella's done, to kind of come up with a middle of the road to present to us and say, here, this is what we're going to do for you by the end of the year. And then hopefully that'll help stop the bleeding. So, Councilwoman Fuller, do you have anything to ask the chief, since this is on the agenda and it's your legislation?
No.
Do you want to bring Chief Costella up to discuss?
Costello, would you like to come up?
Any questions, I'll certainly answer.
Chief, Chief Costello, I do have a question for you. We might as well talk about it while we're here. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief Raymond. Chief, in the police plan, we're talking about this 2% longevity. We would continue to pay that longevity after this year. You're just talking about for the budget year, correct?
Longevity is being paid.
But what I'm saying is, what are we talking about with the long? Just explain.
Well, longevity, of course, I've been here since 1978, so, I mean, we went through the Turner versus Shreveport longevity clarification, the lawsuit, and it expressly determines what longevity is being paid. And it can be a form of, if I give you $200 longevity and have it on account over here, and I give you $200 on your base, it's exactly the same thing. It's not expressly determined as being longevity. And as far as the statute is concerned, let me explain how the 2% longevity statute works. I was trying to help the police officers out because I've been doing this for a long time, and as far as understanding pay scales, benefits, pension plans, the whole 9 yards. And so I'm very familiar with what's going on in the region, what's going on around in the United States. As far as regions and things like that, what's the trends? So as far as longevity is concerned, we've been through, there's 4 structures that dictate how the fire department is structured as far as the funding. You got your longevity statutes, which is made a determination by Turner versus Shreveport in '83. You got your Haskins versus Lafayette, which determines the percentage rule. Then you got the Clint Rushing versus New Orleans, Baton Rouge, that deals with the length of longevity. That was a 17 versus 20. And then you got the Alderman versus City of Shreveport, when it made the determination of what is a firefighter, what constitutes firefighter, and what does not. So those 4 things dictate exactly how a structure is to be made as far as compliance. So when it comes to longevity, everybody will be getting longevity because they're going to be at least getting 2%. That meets the statutory requirement. And the statutory requirement deals with anybody from 3 years of continuous service to additional 20 years, which is the 23rd year. Anything above that, it's not statutorily mandated. So out of all the police officers, if you had 1,100, 1,200 police officers, there should be roughly around 325 to 350 that are statutorily required to get 2% mandate. So that's how that is read. Anyway, but what my plan does, it just gives an assistance to options as to what we can do, because the need is immediate. It's now. It's not because, let me give you one example. Chief Whitehorn brought up this thing at the Zoom meeting we had about the 2008 pay plan that was turned in. The council turned in a plan, the police department turned in a plan. I believe it was Chief Huddleston did it. And he mentioned something about the structure. So I went to my flash drive and I brought up the structure. And what's so ironic about the 2008 pay plan was the regional average for police officers that year, 2009, was $41,000. That was the region we used, the ICMA Southwest Central region. And that particular pay plan, there was the police plan, there was the council plan. And what we were trying to achieve that year, 2009, which went before the city council, it was turned into the city council, was starting the police officers at $43,000 a year on their first year. That's including state pay. What we're trying to achieve in 2021 is $43,500. That's 12 years later. So therefore, if that doesn't proclaim an immediate need, I don't know what does. Now, the chief's plan, the city that put together, they never submitted it to the city council, but we got a vote before the city council. And it was the city council's plan, and it passed 4-3. The mayor at the time decided to veto it. And then Michael Long didn't, the outgoing council member decided not to go along and override the veto. So here we are now trying to get the same exact thing with an additional $500. So what we have is a bleeding of all types of resources. And I know what's going on because over in the Texas area, state police, he talks about the state police. State police, for the first time in its history, and just came out after our Zoom meeting, they're offering a longevity, a lateral transfer incentive. And that is going out from 22 down to 14 week. They're taking, for the first time, it says in their press release, officers that have post-certification 1 year with 30 hours, 2 years without. As long as they were post-certified, they're going to put them through a 14-week. That turns up the volume, the knobs on incentive to try to get from Shreveport. I got a call from one of the firefighters went to Frisco. They're to understand what's going on over there, I take deep dives. I look into the GDP of the economic development of what's going on in the country. And it's off the charts over there. There's a lot of Fortune 500 companies coming in. The growth is off the charts. So they're competing with each other also. And they're also bringing in ancillary places that, like Shreveport, we're highly qualified. We're highly experienced. Our guy that goes over there, he's more experienced than all of them put together. But the fact is, he's going over there, and he called me the other day. They brought him in as a paramedic firefighter at $71,400. They just recently passed an ordinance to the city council authorizing a longevity incentive program. They called him up and said, you're eligible for it. We moved you to level 5, which was $80,000. Next year he'll top out at 82. So these are the things that are going on. They're starting to churn and churn and churn. And I've got a chart of all the people that have left, where they went and when they left, and ones that are projected to leave. And something has to be done. Now this measure I deal with staffing every day, every single day. And we're doing a pretty good job of what we've got. And so, but what I was able to do is, I know what we can work with. And we're operating off a 118 firefighter regiment between all 3 shifts, because we got the COVID, we got everything else, we got vacations, we got all the elements that deal with staffing. And if we were to bring that up to the 153 level, we could do very well, but we'd have a structure. The structure's in place and it's scalable, it's for the future, and then you can have some of these revenue sources take over that you try to pursue. But we're trying to pursue it, and like he says, in April, or try to get a 1/4 sales tax for something else, or more bond issues, which you see what happened on the bond issue because the circumstances dictated what happened and they all failed. But the fact is, we're gonna have to do something now. This gives us the best bridge, not the bridge for the funding, but it gives us the structure for the future, because it addresses lateral transfer incentives, it addresses retention, it addresses the starting pay. When Ms. Fuller's talking about the $3,900 or $4,000 a month, the second year is over $5,000. So it will do a tremendous job, and you got to give it the ability to work. And you have the social media websites, employment websites, that we can put all this information out there, and you watch what happens. We will start doing what they're doing to us, because I incorporated all the elements of what they're doing to us we're doing in the same fashion, so we can also draw in from other fire departments and police departments as well. And both structures that I put in there, they're options. You got an A structure, B structure, C structure, and they're all on the structured with a feature of parity. They all, I do accrual charts for 30 years to see where supervisors are, to see where retention of the lower levels are, and to see where the starting pay is. And each structure does a parallel to where we are back on what we consider parity. We broke from parity in 1999. 2004, with a quarter-cent sales tax, it bifurcated even more. Now this kind of puts it back to where it was, because there's so many Corporal 4s out there because there's no incentive to take a sergeant. It's $189 a month. On our side, it's over $400. So that's not parity. This brings it back to where it should be. And at this format, speaking in front of the Public Safety Committee is fine. I'd sure like to have a lot of one-on-ones with everybody if you have any questions, because this thing goes into great detail, and I would like to explain it in that great detail if I could. So any questions, just let me know.
Thank you, Chief. Councilwoman?
I'll let you know if I have something. I'm good.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
Later.
Not for him.
Okay.
Not for him. With all that's being said, CEO Whitehorn, I'm sure you have the breakdown of the budgets of how this is actually going to affect, and even with this discussion, because nothing right here is final, as we said, that this is just the discussion. My question then becomes, how is it that other department heads are going to feel, or have they made any presentations in conjunction with this? I know that we have public safety, or public works, and those particular departments also to work hand in hand. Have they presented some things that they want to look at as well, as far as increases within their staff?
Councilwoman Taylor, all of the departments has expressed a need that we're not able to accommodate, not necessarily in pay, but in equipment and other areas of concern. The administration has always been in support of police and fire receiving an increase. We have never not been in support of that. But we're also in support of all of our employees receiving an increase in pay. You know, I look at safety, to me, is as important as service when it comes, when it relates to police and fire. And we've heard both of those chiefs talk about the shortages that they have and what's actually required to do the job that we're asking them to do. The calls that we receive from the council members, from the citizens, they have not decreased. We are expected to do more than what is the chief mentioned about the pay plan that we presented back in 2008. We're requested and expected to do more than we were required to do in 2008. So yeah, there should be a greater significance on that. You know, it saddens me that every time we talk about our sister city, what's going on in Bossier, and we compare things in Shreveport, and there is no comparison. They're getting it done, and we're sitting around and we're not getting it done. We have to do better. We have to do better. There's no way that they should be able to levy a public safety fee and we talk about we can't. That's inconceivable to me. We talk about the population. Yeah, we've reduced population in Shreveport, but we've increased the square miles. We still got to do more. Just because you don't have people there don't mean you can't patrol it or don't have to get calls for service in those areas. They just spread out a little bit more. So, you know, we did a manpower allocation study in 2007 talking about the police. At that time, the study showed that we had to have 374 police officers on patrol just to meet minimum staffing. We're talking about safety. Today, we're down to 356 officers on patrol. Down. And we can't fill a shift without calling in overtime. we're averaging about 12 hirebacks a day just in police on patrol. We're to a point where if we had to put all of our emphasis on the backbone of police, which is patrol, we'd be down to 29 officers thereabout just to handle all the specialized services. 29. There's no way we can operate at that level. So I would ask you, please, do not consider vacant positions as a source of funding. First of all, it's not recurring revenue. We can't sustain that. As the other Chief Gustella was saying, you know, you're still gonna have to, at some point, start drawing folks in to get to a preferred staffing level. So if we're gonna take the vacancy dollars and still try to recruit and get folks from other departments to want to be a part of Shreveport or Shreveport Fire Department or the Police Department, those dollars got to come from somewhere. There is a piece of legislation that you voted on last week to hear, and I think the second reading is coming up, and that's Ordinance 106. That deals with ad valorem taxes. And that is directly related to pension and benefits. Just a small increase in that particular ad valorem tax could generate $3.4 million. But we have to have those conversations. And I like what Mr. Kreff said about the quarter-cent sales tax. At some point, we're gonna have to do it. We just can't move forward without generating revenue. We're still facing a $25 million shortfall potential. We have another piece of legislation where we're trying to get a line of credit for $35 million. And we're talking about vehicles and safety equipment that has reached this lifespan. We cannot do it on vacant positions. So I would implore you to look for those reoccurring revenue dollars. And we're gonna have to probably bite the bullet. But I think if it's presented properly to our citizens, we have those town hall discussions and we lay it out there, I think that is the proper way to do what needs to be done, not only for police and fire, but for all of the employees that work for the city of Shreveport, who truly deserve this increase.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Whitehorn. All right, there's nothing else on that. Let's move on. The next item on the agenda is discuss violent crimes in the city of Shreveport. I know we had some shootings last night. Chief, would you kind of give us an update? And you may have already laid this out for us at the last council meeting, but what do we have planned? I mean, it seems like every night we're hearing shots being fired. And
If I can, we'll start off, and this has not been released. I'm actually going to send an email to council this afternoon. I always send an email to the mayor, Chief Whitehorn first, to let them look at the monthly numbers and await any questions, concerns they have. Then I'll send an email this afternoon to your group, and then we'll put these out publicly tomorrow. But I can speak about them, I think, if Chief Whitehorn don't have any concerns about that. Because I'd like to start off here. And I've said this before, you know, I have a habit of speaking and using similar analogies, and I apologize for that. But, you know, perception is reality. But I want to speak about factual information, and then I want to talk about, you know, perception. The July end-of-month crime report shows that we are one Part 1 crime lower than we were last year. So we are lower in total Part 1 crime than we were in our 45-year historic low year. However, we are 68% above the homicide rate for last year. That one number is what pulls the conversation completely off how low crime is in all these other categories, because it's violent crime and it's extremely concerning. So I'm not going to stand here and talk about how low Part 1 crime is, because that's really a secondary conversation to how high homicide rates and shootings are. Second to that, and I got an email while I was in here, so forgive me for having to pull it up on my phone, not having it in front of me, but I asked for a comparison of shots fired calls as well as shootings. A shots fired call is not necessarily an individual incident. So if all of us live in the same neighborhood and we all hear a shooting, we may all call it in. And we do our best to try to identify, well, Councilman Bowman and Chief Raymond live next door, that's probably the same shooting. We don't always get that right. Shootings, obviously, are tracked because that means someone or something was hit, right? A house was hit, a person was hit, so that's, that doesn't matter how many people called, it's a statistically factual number. But if I look at just the month of August and even into year-long comparisons, January to August 15th to date, shots fired calls for the city are quite a bit higher than they have been over the last 5 years, as well as shootings. So just for a quick example, in 2019 at this time frame, we had 2,198 shots fired calls that the Shreveport Police Department received. This year alone, at this time, same segment of time, we've had 3,016 shots fired calls. So we've had an increase of 800 shots fired calls for service in the city of Shreveport in 1 year. Shootings, again, in which someone or something was actually struck with a bullet, last year at this time frame we had 199. This year we have 255. So 25% increase in the number of objects that were struck. So that's factual information. Coming off that, what we're doing to address it. And I think there's a couple of key components, so I don't want anybody to get drawn to one particular aspect. One of them is maintaining a sufficient number of officers on patrol. So our goal is that the citizens, other than hearing our conversations, don't know that we're short on officers, because the number of officers on patrol is the same number we had on patrol last year. The difference is it's the same officer on 2 or 3 of those shifts versus having a new officer replenished every 8 hours. But the idea is that the citizens don't realize that there's a decrease in service, because there's not. They have just as many officers. That means specialized units are operating on skeleton crew numbers, just enough to get by, and they're also working patrol. That's a part of the plan to address it. The second part is proactive policing. I did a press conference yesterday. I hope all of you got a chance to see that. We had our Office of Special Investigations, primarily the street level interdiction unit, and they were joined by some other officers that work in various divisions, and they did a proactive policing effort, mainly in Crime Area 3, focused on cruising operations and looking specifically for weapons offenses. And they came across over 60 firearms in vehicles. Half of them were illegal. So we seized 30 firearms, we made 27 felony arrests, we made another 18 misdemeanor arrests, seized a significant, in my opinion, amount of narcotics. And that was just a 3-day operation with 10 or 12 additional officers on the street. So we're gonna do more of those operations. We do those fairly often, we just don't always do a press conference about it. But I thought it was important to note what proactive policing means, because I think that word gets twisted around and misunderstood a lot. But proactive policing is we're out there trying to prevent the crime. So we didn't wait for a shooting call to go out to go try to find who did it. We went and tried to get the illegal weapon out of the car before a shooting occurred. And although we had a violent weekend, we had 6 or 9, I believe, individual shootings. We may have had 15 or 20 had we not seized 30 illegal firearms off the streets. And so I think that's important. Another part of the component that I haven't spoke a lot about, and it's somewhat because for operational efficiency, is a violent crimes task force, where we have investigators from our detective division, primarily violent crimes, working with the Office of Special Investigations and Intel, and then some of the federal agencies to identify those individuals that we know are either going to be a victim or a suspect in a violent crime if we don't get them off the street. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail of how we're identifying them, but we've got some creative ways of doing that, and then try to get those individuals off the street. We're either going to save their life or we're going to save the life of somebody else by doing that. And I think that's a very key component to what we're doing that I really don't discuss a whole lot, because again, it's for that to work properly, we can't talk about it as often as maybe some would like me to. And the piece that's missing that we haven't been able to do a good job is that community interaction between police and citizens, where we're knocking on your door or we're coming to a community center near you and we're creating those relationships so that when you do have a violent crime, there's more, people are a little more calm about wanting to share information with the police. We still have a big breakdown in communication. Y'all get the major notes, and a lot of them will say, victim is uncooperative, or even somebody that's shot and shows up at the hospital, they don't know who shot them, they don't know why anybody would want to shoot them, and they don't want to press charges if we find out who did shoot them. That doesn't make a lot of sense. If somebody shoots me, I'll say for the record, I want you to find out who did it, and I want to put them in jail, and I want to cooperate with you. Right? That's kind of the typical response you would get. But we're coming across more and more people that just do not want police assistance, which leads you to believe that they want to handle it themselves, which leads to more violence. And so to overcome that piece, we've got to get out in the community, and that has been made difficult because of COVID-19.
What, Chief, I know that before I took office back, I think it was Councilman Bowman and Councilman Bradford, there was a plan to do a District 18 or something like that, where the sheriff's office came in to give y'all support in the outlying areas. Is that something that we've considered again at this point?
We haven't considered it lately. From a staffing perspective, it wouldn't create a whole, we don't have a lot of people in the area that the sheriff's office was going to patrol. So we don't have a number of officers out there that aren't being utilized for calls for service. The way our crime districts are drawn up, they were drawn up in such a manner that we anticipated every crime district would have equivalent amounts of crime. Now, some of the districts are much larger than others because of that, because it would take a larger area to have an equivalent amount of crime as some other inner city areas. So the reality is that in those areas that the sheriff's office was going to patrol, there's not a lot of crime, and so you don't have a lot of officers down there. They're up in other portions of the city where there is more crime, and they have to travel a little further for those rare instances that you have crime in some of those areas. I talk to the sheriff's office often, talk to Sheriff Prater probably weekly, talk to Cordell Williams with State Police probably weekly, and I feel certain that they're doing what they can, keeping in mind that they're facing the same problems we are. Sheriff's office is not fully staffed. He's having problems recruiting just as the Shreveport Police is. Louisiana State Police, at least Troop G, they're not fully staffed. They're having problems responding to I believe they respond to 7 parishes northwest Louisiana. A lot of smaller agencies really depend on Louisiana State Police for anything above a basic investigation. So if they have thefts and robberies and homicides and rapes, those are worked by the state police. And so a lot of their efforts go to these other agencies that do not have manpower at all. So I think they're stretched thin as we are.
Well, the only reason I brought that up is I've got a business owner that owns a business in my district. However, he lives in another district in the Highland area. And they had an incident at his house at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning about a week ago. And he said it took about 25 minutes for 2 officers to get there. And it was I wouldn't consider it was an alarm going off, but it took that long for him to get there. And he wanted them to check it out. And they said that they had come from Southern Loop, and which is I guess theoretically possible because it's all in the same area,
Same
but
district.
maybe not the district. So I just didn't know if maybe bringing in the sheriff's office for the outer lying areas would not maybe free up, especially during, because it looks like the crime's happening from about, I know it's happening during the day, but from about 10 o'clock at night till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, maybe bringing in those officers closer to where the crime is happening. And I'm not trying to, I'll probably have calls today that I'm trying to take police away from Southern Trace, but I'm just saying, for an area closer to town that's having a lot of issues, for them to have to wait 25 minutes because somebody's out checking a building alarm
Right.
on Southern Loop, when the sheriff could be sitting right next door to that. I would like to see us try to work a little bit closer together, because the sheriff's department sits at the end of Southern Loop Circle all the time, but you would never know that they were there if a building alarm's going off
Right.
down at Dax on Southern Loop. They would never even know. It's not like what we have at the fire, they have at the fire department where it's automatic aid, but those officers may have been able to be freed up with something that a deputy may have just been able to stop by and say, hey, alarm's going off, we don't have any open doors, something like that.
And I'll certainly reach back out and see if they have that ability at this point to offer assistance. And one thing I didn't mention, and I've got several members here, we've started an internal committee for change.
Right.
That I did want to recognize. They came to the public safety meeting. We're in conversation. One of the concerns with the police department is we've become a jack of all trades and gotten away from a lot of criminal work. So for example, we get calls during the school year, my child won't get up and get ready for school, send the police. Well, we respond, just as Chief Wolverton said, but that's not a police matter, right? Or someone calls and says there's a dog running through the neighborhood, don't know where the owner is, send the police. We respond. That's not a police matter. So there's about 10 or 12 routine calls that our officers respond to that are pulling us away from real police work, decreasing violent crime. And so we're going to, for the next couple of weeks, put out some public safety messages, probably do a press conference, and we're going to redirect those calls to the appropriate agency. And so I'll just use the animal call because that's the easy one. If the animal is biting, has bit somebody, or they're a threat to someone, yeah, police are going to show up. Right? We're going to serve and protect our citizens. But if this is just a dog that appears to have lost its owner, we're going to direct that citizen to call Animal Control Services, which is the same thing a police officer would do, except the police officer would sit on scene for an hour or however long it takes for them to respond and catch the dog. We're not going to do that. We'll show up if there's a danger to someone's life, or if the fire department needs us because somebody was bit. But otherwise, we're going to redirect that call. And so we're going to put forth some effort into that to hopefully reduce the calls for service we do respond to, and thereby reduce the number of officers we need to fully staff one of those shifts. So we're trying to do some things in the interim to be able to recruit more officers to the profession.
I've had some discussions with some members of that committee. I think it's a good idea, like parking lot accidents.
That's another one.
I don't think Bossier, we compare ourselves to Bossier a lot. They're not writing parking lot accidents.
We're gonna follow the statute as to when we need to, if it's an injury, if it's more than $500 in damage, or if there's private property damage, police will respond and write a report. If you bump the car behind you, you're gonna exchange information with the driver. We're probably gonna come up with a form to help you out as to what do I need, and then we won't respond. And that's gonna, because whether you write a private property accident or a major accident, you're gonna spend 45 minutes on a report. That's 45 minutes that officer could better spend patrolling, being proactive, or getting to those more important calls for service quicker if they weren't down on something that's really not criminal in nature.
Well, I think the old saying, if you sit around and stagnate, you're not going to make any changes. So I appreciate the effort of both departments and both of y'all coming today.
Sure.
So, thank you, Chief. Next on the agenda, we had a discussion about Caddo Parish Juvenile Detention Center. There was going to be a presentation, but unfortunately they weren't able to make it today. And Chief, I'd like to talk to you about this. Not right now, but I think that we need to meet, and maybe with the administration. I don't know if you've heard anything about it, Chief Whitehorn, but I like the way it sounds to me. But basically what there is a move right now to discuss a detention center for our juvenile detention in the parish, and the city jail's been brought up as an option. And I think that's something we need to look at, but I don't want to go any further than that today. But I think that's worth the discussion. So, anybody else have anything they'd like to add? All right, if not, we adjourn.